We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA.
Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome back to Notify America. We have multiple pressing stories to get to, stories that include a big L, a big fat loss for the anti-democratic activists trying to keep Donald Trump from running for president after the Michigan Supreme Court weighed in this morning. Also, we have California Governor Gavin Newsome taking some flack from his party after coming to the defense of Donald Trump. Also, Paul Whelan, the American citizen, a Marine who was left behind in a Russian prison after the Biden administration made the deliberate choice to rescue Brittany Griner instead of him. Well, he's now speaking out, letting Joe Biden have it, saying promises were made to him, promises that have now been broken, that he's been forgotten. Well, we have the tape, but before we get started, press the like button, subscribe, share the video with a friend. All of that helps, as we are a new channel here on YouTube, and this platform doesn't like this type of content. When you're in the news and politics category on YouTube, they purposely suppress non-mainstream sources. The Michigan Supreme Court just ruled to not disqualify Donald Trump for running for president, a major loss for the anti-democratic activists who've been overly glee and giddy following the Colorado Supreme Court decision last week. Well, Michigan's a battleground state, a vital state for Trump's path to 270 electoral votes, which is what's needed to win the election. Early this morning, state Supreme Court left intact a lower court ruling that rejected efforts to bar him over his role in the J6 riot, denying a request to appeal the decision, saying it is not persuaded that the questions presented should be reviewed by this court. Watch.
But now the Michigan State Supreme Court, again, just moments ago, ruling that he will, in fact, be on the Republican primary ballot.
And let's be clear, he did try to interfere and overturn the election results, but legal scholars have been split as to whether or not that should keep him from these ballots here. And we're seeing that now play out in the states. Colorado, at least for now, has him off the ballot. Now Michigan says he can stay on. And we know the Supreme Court likely will end up with that Colorado case at some point down the road. But, you know, whether or not this holds, the politics of this are also very, very tricky. There are some Democrats who say, look, you know, Trump should be held accountable for inspiring an insurrection.
Yeah, and the Democrats who are saying that publicly are twisting themselves into a pretzel, saying on one hand that Trump interfered with democracy, yet on the other, now calling to have him disqualified so you can't vote for him, which is the definition of election interference. So ridiculous that it's comical, and it's why constitutional scholars say that the U.S. Supreme Court will definitely take this up, take the Colorado decision up, as we now have two Supreme Courts, two state Supreme Courts coming down differently on how to interpret the 14th Amendment. This is what the Supreme Court is for, right? But hopefully they don't quash it too soon, because each time that this happens, or rather if this happens again, that another state removes him from the ballot, it just shows the country like how crazy these people are. The level of hypocrisy, screaming about protecting democracy while clearly interfering with it. I mean, anytime you have the government telling Americans they can't do something, it makes us want to do it more. So all they're doing is hurting themselves. And California Governor Gavin Newsome seems to realize this. He just responded publicly to his lieutenant governor urging her state Supreme Court to follow Colorado's lead to remove Trump from the California ballot. Well, Gavin Newsome, he came out and he bashed her statement, saying he doesn't agree with this approach, that in California, he says, we defeat candidates at the polls. And look, I have to give him credit for saying that. You know, it's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. Let the American people decide. The government should have no place in dictating who we're allowed to vote for. Point blank, period. Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy was asked during a Fox News interview if he would accept a position in a Trump administration. Vivek responded by saying this: he is not a plan B kind of guy, saying, I didn't get to where I am. I'm 38 years old. I've founded multiple multi-billion-dollar companies, which he has, we're blessed with the American dream to be able to self-finance this campaign, and I didn't get to where I am, and Apoorva, that's his wife, didn't get to where she is by being Plan B type of people. So let me know what you think. Would Vivek be a good addition to a Trump cabinet? I personally think, he's probably the best candidate running right now, as he's, all about small government, and he understands the core issue, the core problem that we're all dealing with right now. He understands the rot that's taken over Washington. In another story, American Marine Paul Whelan, who was arrested in Russia back in 2018 on fudged up charges, he just did a phone interview last week with the BBC, and he let President Biden have a piece of his mind, letting loose and exposing what he says are broken promises that were made to him from an administration that clearly doesn't care about leaving a Marine behind. For some context, Biden's State Department last year, they reached a deal for a prisoner exchange with Russia after working on it for months to get Paul Whelan home. But then during the negotiations, this female American basketball player, Brittany Griner, was arrested in Russia for carrying hashish oil, cannabis oil, the type of thing that you use in those vape cartridges. Well, she brought it on the plane with her, and she got arrested for it. She got caught, she got arrested for it. Now, this happened toward the later stages of these negotiations to bring Paul back home. Well, Russia gave the Biden team an ultimatum. You either get Paul Whelan or you get Brittany Griner, not both. And the rest is history. We all know what happened. They chose Brittany Griner. Now, Paul, he had been in Russian prison since 2018. Brittany Griner arrested in February 2022. Paul was arrested for fake charges. He's a real political prisoner. Brittany Griner was arrested for carrying cannabis oil onto a plane. So two very different situations. And it goes without saying that if you were Paul Whelan and you were being promised by your president to the run-up to these negotiations that you were about to come home, that the U.S. was bringing you home, come to find out he chooses to bring Brittany instead, well, you'd be pretty pissed off if you were him. Well, here he is last week speaking to the BBC. Watch this.
Paul Whelan says he feels abandoned by his government.
It's serious betrayal. It's extremely frustrating.
I've never heard him talk like this before.
I know that the U.S. has come up with all sorts of proposals, serious proposals, but it's not what the Russians are after. So they keep going back and forth. The only problem is it's my life that's draining away. Why will they do this? It's 5 years. It's unfathomable to me that they left me behind.
The US can get its prisoners back. Last year, an American basketball star was swapped for a convicted Russian arms trader, released by the US.
The conditions in the camp have declined seriously. The barracks have black mold.
But Paul Whelan is now facing his 5th Christmas as a prisoner.
Are you worried that there's going to be another deal and that you're going to be left behind again?
Yeah, I am worried that there'll be a deal that'll leave me here. With each case, my case is going to the back of the line.
Let me know in the comments if you think that Paul Whelan would still be in Russia, still be in prison in Russia if Donald Trump were president. Serious question. I don't know if you remember, but during the Trump administration, there were a number of times where he directly intervened to get Americans out of jail or out of prison in these other countries. There was that time with rapper A$AP Rocky where he was arrested in Sweden after getting into a brawl or something like that. Well, Trump went on Twitter, started tweeting free A$AP Rocky. He went so far as to call Sweden's president or its premier, whatever they call it over there, and he was lobbying to get him released. And at the time, the media was ripping him for it, for getting involved or interfering in another country's justice system. But it worked because a few days later, they released him and sent him back to the States. Something, by the way, similar happened in China as well. Kind of foggy on those details, but I remember him calling Xi Jinping after some Americans shoplifted or something over there, which is a serious crime in China. Well, he got involved personally in that case as well and got them out of trouble. I'm not saying, that's the correct way to do it necessarily, but in the case of Paul Whelan, this is a former Marine who's been left behind because Joe Biden wanted to win brownie points with his base. Joe should get on the phone, call up Vladimir Putin, make a deal, even use Trump as a mediator. Now, meanwhile, in another story, the White House just announced that Joe and Jill Biden have left for the Virgin Islands to begin their New Year's vacation on the island of St. Croix. And while the president soaks up the sun down in the Caribbean for the next week, Real Clear Politics has his numbers still down in their poll of polls. Currently, Trump's up by 3 points, a 3-point spread. This is the average, by the way, the average of all the polls, not the right-wing polls or the MAGA polls. We're talking The Economist, YouGov poll, Morning Consult, Wall Street Journal poll has Trump up 4. The Rasmussen poll has him up 10. A lot of these polls were conducted prior to the Colorado Supreme Court ruling as well. So we'll see, how that impacted the numbers next week. All right, that wraps up this episode. Press the like button, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.